Womanjika, Merambik Bunarong, Nemde Baraptan Atawilum. Many thousands of years ago, the sea moved in, a time of chaos and crisis that impacted on us, the Bunwarang language group. The sea became angry. Naran became angry and threatened to take the whole of their country. The people, frightened, sought the advice of their old wise men and women. And the old people retreated and asked Banjul what to do. Banjul was very angry because they broke law with nature. They overkilled and they ate the fish during their breeding season. They neglected their friends, they neglected their families. They didn't keep the balance with nature. Banjul then instructed them back with the law not to harm the land or the children. And then he went out and pointed his spear to the waters to stop rising and threatened to cover the whole of their country. Now there's a narrow little strip around the coast of our bay that we can reside on. But it's a constant reminder when we look out at that beautiful Port Phillip Bay not to harm the land or the children.
Hi Patrice, my name's Neil Blake. I'm with the Port Phillip Eco Centre in St Kilda. I'm just reading about a bunch of pre-production pallets that have turned up at West Beach. Yeah, they're raw materials for most things that are made of plastic that are shipped around and then moulded into various items. There's literally thousands of them that have been washed in on the tide. It just seems to me to be a bit of a serious concern that there are so many of them getting into the waterways. If you look along the strand line here, you'll find at least 10,000 earls just in this one day on this beach.
Oh my God, amazing.
So those shouldn't be drifting down,
but
huh?
No, how do they get into the water?
So it could be all over. I mean, it could be everywhere.
They're definitely being collected all around the globe.
I think it's a never-ending story, this pick up, clean up.
The seabird population on Lord Howe Island, there's a species there called the flesh-footed shearwater, which is a large mutton bird. The proportion of the population that's been impacted by plastic debris has gone from around 75% to 100%, even though Lord Howe Island is more than 700 kilometres from the nearest metropolitan centre. So it's a really incredible amount of plastic inside of the bird, and the birds would have eaten each of these individual pieces over the span of about 3 months. So it's not a lot of time has passed to accumulate this level, and it really just kind of highlights the rate at which plastic pollution is obviously entering the environment and then flowing on to kind of these remote locations where it really shouldn't be. So really from the Arctic straight through to the Antarctic is just littered with our plastic waste.
EPA is a regulatory agency in Victoria, and we investigate reports of pollution. We also licence key discharges to our waterways, and we also set standards for pollutants that are discharged to these systems. And this is all done to try and minimise impact on the waterways. I guess the thing with Neil's work, where the microplastics turn up, that's a newer sort of area in terms of, particularly it's not a Coke bottle, but it's this really small thing that looks a lot like a piece of sand. So it's a confounding sort of problem.
Because you're finding them in all sorts of spots, aren't you, around the bay?
I found them from as far as Altona down to Sorrento.
Okay, right. They're complete opposites, really.
Because it is so small, if you're just walking along the riverbank, you wouldn't notice this, for example.
I've probably walked over plenty of noodles and things without really noticing they're there.
Yeah, well, the theory is too that might look like a fish egg floating in the water, you know, so it sort of looks like food for quite a number of birds and other and fish, etc. I really think we need to get particularly schools and younger people sort of involved in actually measuring this so that we can make it more on the radar of the authorities. So I figured that rather than a boring old dork like me going out and trying to encourage young people, then you as the youth ambassador should be doing the job, Gio. There's been a general perception in the community that litter is just an amenity issue, just makes things look unattractive, but there's obviously a lot more to it than that.
There's 7 billion people on the planet, and the bulk of those people use plastic. And increasingly, it's disposable plastic. It's plastic that's designed to be thrown away. You use it for a matter of minutes, maybe an hour, and then it becomes waste. When you do that, you're creating a very easy avenue for this stuff to get into our ocean, because people will forget to put it in a bin. Maybe the bin is overflowing. People might just litter. Various people will manage their waste poorly. And then so the next storm comes, the wind comes, and it's just going to blow this stuff down our stormwater drains, into our creeks and our rivers, into our bays. And the next stop is the ocean. We're at Point Ormond in Elwood, which is not too far away from the Yarra Mouth, which is around about 3 kilometres to the northwest of us here. And a lot of the trash that gets washed out through the Yarra outflows follows the northeastern coast of the bay and comes around onto shorelines like this. I'm particularly concerned about these rock walls in that they can actually trap plastic bottles and eventually keep them almost like in a cage that gets belted by wave action that gradually abrades the plastics and strips off smaller and smaller pieces that eventually escape into the bay. A piece of plastic container here is an example of one that's been lodged in the rocks. It's photo-degrading and becoming more brittle as it ages, so that once you just do that, you can see that it quite easily fractures. Then there's a chance they might be ingested by fish or other species.
Well, the reality is the lifespan of plastic in the marine environment is essentially forever. It never disappears. It only simply breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, keeping in mind that smaller pieces means more species can potentially ingest it. This is essentially bite-sized plastic, perfect for marine creatures. And this is the very typical type of debris that we find along the high tide mark. So you can see there's a few of these white, very circular pieces of plastic that have nice round edges. And these are called nodal because they're so small and so difficult to control and also to collect if they're lost, do get lost in the system, potentially in the millions or billions around the globe.
And another. Be interesting to look a little bit further up. There is a rosins plant nearby. There's also a couple of other manufacturing and plastics facilities too in the neighbourhood and close to the drain. So it's possible that maybe pallets were spilt on a loading bay or maybe swept off the factory floor and got out onto the street and into the drain. We can only speculate as to where they might have come from, but it's definitely worth, it'd be worth investigating those sources.
Be well worth getting them analysed for toxins to see what they're carrying.
When the plastic is released out into the marine environment, either accidentally or intentionally, it can float around in the ocean for many, many decades, where it's slowly kind of broken down. And it takes all of the contaminants that are out in the marine environment in very minute, diluted quantities, which is things like PCBs or DDT, and it absorbs it onto the surface of those plastic items like a little toxic bullet. We're eating those marine predators that are also kind of at the top of their own food chain. And what happens is biomagnification and also bioaccumulation. If ingested by a marine creature, all of the contaminants in and on the surface are then transferred into that animal's bodily tissues through natural digestive enzymes. We inherit those contaminants into our own tissues, and it explains why a lot of food items come with what's called consumption recommendations. You know, you can't eat more than X number of servings per week, particularly, you know, for pregnant women. That's really an indicator sign that there are contaminants in those food products.
Well, really, you know, you've got to think about it in the longer term. You know, if we go back to the days when the Bunurong people and other Aboriginal tribes of Wathaurong were around the bay, when there were no plastics, they were able to leave a very small footprint, and they kept it in good shape. Now it's our turn. We have to look to the future. Either that or we say, oh, well, there is no future. I don't see that as an option.
Nearly in the sunset.
All we want to do is we want to inspire you. Take your friends, take your two hands and go down to the beach, do beach cleanup. That today would have taken maybe 5 minutes. Sometimes the smallest items are the most deadly. If I only had one hand and I got it stuck in here, oh dear. A little penguin, he can't just take his other hand and take it off.
Do you have many instances of seals and things being tangled up with stuff down here?
Mainly here, it's the old beer can holders, stuff like to stick their head through. And fishing line would have to be the worst stuff in the world. It doesn't biodegrade, it just stays there. The more they move around, the more they get caught, the worse it gets.
How do the zoo people come down and try and fix that?
Sure, if somebody sees that seal in a bad shape, we notify them, they come down.
Look, that one's about to fall off.
And we have 3 seals that call Wild Sea home. Each of them have been rescued from life-threatening circumstances and they can no longer live in the wild.
My name's Adrian Howard and I'm a senior keeper here at Melbourne Zoo. For a long time now I've coordinated our marine response. And part of that role is to respond to sick and injured marine mammals, but also marine birds like penguins. But primarily we're dealing with seals that have had some kind of impact, and a lot of that is human impact, inclusive of pollution-related things.
We've got many animals here at the zoo that have come to us through rehabilitation because they've been injured by our rubbish out in the wilds. Penny over here, Penny came in entangled in fishing line, so he had fishing line around the end of his wing and it was so tight that it actually exposed the bone. So when he came here to the zoo, the vets had to amputate a section of his wing and it means he can't fly anymore. He's got a very good life here at the zoo, but he should be back out in the wild.
Over the past few weeks, we've started diving around piers around Port Phillip Bay, doing fishing line collection. So far, we've found quite a lot. And we're hoping today to also get a pretty good collection and clean up a bit of what's under there.
Multitude of lures, weights in the line as well. What that is? Oh, it's a reel. A real fishing reel. But there's a lot of these lures sort of everywhere. But I mean, even in this shorter time, you can see the amount that we have got. So hopefully that's helped a bit.
In our trip that we did out last week, we found a lot of sea urchins and sea stars tangled up in the debris. So we were able to free quite a lot of those, but then it also extrapolates out to a much wider impact as well on marine mammals, things like seals, which is really close to our heart, working with seals at the zoo.
Fantastic. This is interesting. I wonder what she's going to do with this. Oh, brilliant. Excellent. That's right, Tarwin.
Fishermen that have monofilament fishing line, which is an enormous entanglement item for penguins, seals and other marine creatures, they can pop it in here. We think that that'll have an impact. So if you see one of these bins, definitely use it.
My main focus is looking at the population of dolphin species that are in Port Phillip Bay and Gippsland Lakes, and having a look at the species status and population genetics and the conservation status of those animals. It was a pretty amazing discovery. I didn't expect to start my PhD, and finishing off with a new dolphin species, but the animals out in Port Phillip Bay that I've been researching for quite a few years, they're a bit of a mishmash of both bottlenose dolphin species. And what we found at each turn that we had a look at and each independent data set was that these animals were very, very different. The dolphin is Tersiops australis, and the common name is Baranan, with a population of around about, between 80 and 120. So quite a unique setup here. So necropsies are always interesting. Unlike the Baranan dolphin, which is resident to this area, Steno washed ashore, which is quite a unique opportunity to have a look at a species that we wouldn't ordinarily see. And when we did the necropsy, we found that it had a substantial amount of plastic bags in its stomach, and it was obviously very compromised because of that. So there's always that sad element to those sorts of events, because you know that they're preventable. If it's old age or if it's disease that's naturally occurring in the population, that's a cause of death. But when it's something that we've done, then that's always quite hard to be able to rationalise.
So if we make this bay untenable in terms of pollution or their inability to thrive, that will be the end of the population. And if we lose 2 breeding females in any 1 year, we will lose this population in 25 years.
And the amount of the damage that we're doing, just throwing rubbish out. It's a shame, wrecking the natural habitats of our native species. It's really sad.
We have hundreds, literally hundreds of drains running into the bay. There's 3,000 kilometres of creeks and streams running into the Western Port and Port Phillip Bay, and all of them carry plastics pollution because it floats.
Not a lot of water gets exchanged. The bit of work we've done recently, I think we've got 1.65 years for it to get out. I did a little simulation for Neil as well, just sort of trying to replicate a nurdle being a 2mm piece of plastic that doesn't sink, where it was released off a plume front. And there's settleable material, which will then all fall out in these sort of the quieter parts of the bay. The floatable stuff will tend to rattle around the bay for some time. Little bits do get out, but predominantly it is a pretty enclosed system, so that's why we need to be very aware of what is coming down our catchments out into the bay.
External pollutants don't come into the bay very much at all, and so that means that we have the opportunity to do something about protecting ourselves in the future.
There have been some tag litter studies in Port Phillip Bay and waterways feeding into it back in the 1990s, but not too much specific research into plastic that is in the bay now. So this is really a first in that sense. How much plastic we'll find, we don't know. In the Yarra sample, there was quite a lot of polystyrene beads, and they probably might be just as serious as these noodles anyway, but we're going to really need, as I say, to measure the problem, and we'd like to continue doing the trawls around the bay and then take the message to the schools in the Yarra catchment. What ends up on the ground in your schoolyard eventually goes through the river and ends up in the bay.
Yeah, that's right.
From a baseline perspective, it's very hard to assess how things are moving along. Are things getting worse with regards to plastic in certain locations if you don't have a historical value with which to compare them? And so all we can look at is a snapshot of what's going on right now, not what things used to be like 10 or maybe 30 years ago. So these kinds of studies are hugely informative in the long term.
Because from such small areas, you've collected heaps, haven't you?
Yeah.
Is there anything with like shape or colour or anything that could trace it back to a particular brand or something?
Yeah, where it's all come from.
Yeah, it's definitely not an appropriate place to dump rubbish, and it doesn't stop unless something something really big happens in the community. There's so much worth protecting here.
I would like basically to take this opportunity just to thank all of the people who have come tonight. Really, this evening is about getting all of the people together, some who possibly have never met each other before, who've been doing fantastic works in their own little patch to look after the bay. And it's really is exciting to see how much good work is being done by people.
We represent a group called Beach Patrol. So we start off at Port Melbourne and we do 3206, which is Middle Park, and all the postcodes down. So we're trying to recruit members to expand our reach around the bay, and we meet once a month to pick up all the crap that's lying on the beaches that washes in from the ocean.
I think we'd like to see it go all the way around the peninsula, wouldn't we? And just have local groups taking care of their foreshore and having it sustainable within people's mindsets as well to come out and clean up. Wouldn't it put Melbourne on the map for all the right reasons? Something that we're all behind, a nice, clean environment, a beautiful Melbourne in more ways than one.
If we want to try and limit and stop the amount of these types of rubbish getting into our environment, the simplest way is to reward people for doing the right thing with it. But you've only got to look across the border at South Australia, where they have a container deposit system. You get 10 cents back for each bottle, can or container that you recycle, and they recycle 80% of all their bottles and cans.
They clean up the beach so the animals don't eat it and get sick and die, or they don't get caught in it and stuff.
I'm from Bags Revolt, and I make art with plastics, and I invite the community and facilitate workshops teaching the community how to reuse those plastics into art. And I use social media to spread the message that plastic is a serious threat to the environment, and that we have to really rethink how we are using plastics, and we have to think about refusing, reducing, and reusing creatively.
I take occasional walks through the creek, just showing people the local wildlife, and it's often quite surprising for people to realise that they've got such a rich area that they live in, and that often creates a response that they want to look after it.
When we think about what Bunjil's law was, not to harm the land or the children, that's our littlest creatures. They all have a right to live. But we've got to make sure we protect them.
Under the water, we have more endemic species in Port Phillip Bay than what you'll find on the Great Barrier Reef.
And if you dive out there like we do, it's just a wonderful garden of colours and rich things, and there's life on life on life.
Nowhere else in the world do we have the Burren dolphin, and Port Phillip Bay is its home, and we need to be looking after not only the dolphin but the environment that they're living in, and really think about how we're disposing of plastic waste.
80% of the litter in the ocean is thought to have originated on land, which means by simply cleaning up our beaches and preventing new litter from getting onto the beach, we could make a very significant contribution to the amount of plastic entering the ocean.
We're living in the plastic age, and people need to have a greater awareness of what the implications of that mean for the environment. We're better off fixing the problem before it gets totally out of hand.
No, Port Phillip Bay, it's our home, our beautiful home.